And so certainly at this point, I have come to understand that all symptoms, whether they are physical or psycho-emotional, are meaningful, that they carry a very specific message and sometimes an invitation to further growth, and that unless we know how to just sort of let it hurt for a while so that we can explore what it's all about, we will miss that opportunity.
Namaste. You're listening to the Sivana Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SivanaSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Sivana listeners. Welcome back. We have an absolutely fantastic guest for you today. Before I tell you about her, it's so juicy. I'm so excited. I wanted to just take a quick moment to remind you to leave us a review here on iTunes. Even if iTunes isn't how you usually listen to the show, this really helps us get the show in front of more people who are trying to transform their life through yoga and meditation, and it means so much to me. So take a quick moment to do that today if you haven't already. And buckle your seatbelt because we have a really exciting, controversial at times too, conversation with Kelly Brogan, MD, our guest today. She is a Manhattan-based holistic women's health psychiatrist. She's the author of the New York Times bestselling book, A Mind of Your Own. She's the co-editor of the landmark textbook, Integrative Therapies for Depression. She completed her psychiatric training and fellowship at NYU Medical Center after graduating from Cornell University Medical College, and she has a BS from MIT in Systems Neuroscience. She's board certified in psychiatry, psychosomatic medicine, and integrative holistic medicine, and is specialized in root cause resolution approach to psychiatric syndromes and symptoms. The coolest part, on top of all of that, is that she's also a certified KRI Kundalini Yoga teacher and a mom of 2. Now, even though Kelly specializes and treats women, gentlemen, you do not want to miss this episode. Everything we talk about is relevant for both men and women, so make sure to stay tuned. So it's not every day that we have an MD who's a holistic women's health psychiatrist on the show, who's also a Kundalini yoga teacher. So you guys can only imagine how excited I am. Kelly, welcome. I'm so excited to chat with you.
Total pleasure to be here.
So most of our listeners have a pretty dedicated yoga and meditation practice like you. So they have a really solid foundation about how to integrate a lot of the principles that I know you love to teach and write about. I know you've written that depression and a variety of other medical conditions can actually be viewed as a gift. Can you tell our listeners about that?
So most of us have, whether you've departed from this consciousness or not, we still have been marinating in the concept of bad diseases, right? So this idea that whether you're born with it or whether, there was some faulty wiring, that began impacting your life at a certain point after a particular stress or whatever, this notion that when we get sick, it's a bad thing, and we need to work to manage the situation and suppress the symptoms. In my conventional training, of course, I was oriented to this idea around mental illness and this notion that, we have biochemical imbalances that account for these very dangerous and disabling diseases, whether it's schizophrenia or depression or OCD or generalized anxiety or ADHD. And the goal is to manage the symptoms, and that almost always includes taking medication for the rest of one's life, and that's just sort of the deal. What I found, actually, is that when we begin to explore a more ancient consciousness or Eastern traditional consciousness, something outside of the American ethos, we find that there is a lot of attention paid to the value, meaning and purpose of suffering, right? So whether that's grief or pain, physical, emotional, or otherwise, that there is an alchemy that occurs in this space that cannot otherwise be replicated in like a generally functional life, or even in the experiences of contentment or bliss or happiness, right? That there's something rich in that fertile soil of struggle that we need to know how to work with. And so what I've found is that the people that I work with who are labeled with depression, these people are by and large very sensitive, okay? They're sensitive on many levels. They're like the canaries in the coal mine. So one of the ways that they are sensitive is physiologically. So they are sensitive to nutritional deficiencies, to hormonal imbalance, to toxic exposures, to gut insult. They're sensitive to medication adverse effects. So whether they take antibiotics or get a vaccine, for example. But they're also sensitive on other levels, right? On consciousness levels, on spiritual levels. So they feel others' pain. They feel sometimes ancestral pain. They feel sometimes the pain of the planet, right? So these are the people who might look at, an image on social media of like a duck, drowning in an oil spill and feel that like squeeze in their heart, but it doesn't really go away. And then it sort of imprints on their consciousness and they carry it with them. They're almost like energetic lint brushes and they accumulate, other sources of pain over the course of their life. Most of the time, they also have had an experience of trauma. And so this kind of sensitivity, when we depersonalize it and we say, oh, well, it's just your serotonin is imbalance and you just need to take a medication to get you out of this rut, we've robbed that person of a very meaningful narrative for their experience and of any sort of, initiation to their own broader self-experience, which of course we know initiation is always hard, right? And that we don't do it anymore in our culture, but there is a challenge embedded in it. And so certainly at this point, I have come to understand that all symptoms, whether they are physical or psycho-emotional, are meaningful, that they carry a very specific message and sometimes an invitation to further growth, and that unless we know how to just sort of let it hurt for a while so that we can explore what it's all about, we will miss that opportunity.
One of the big breakthroughs I had when reading more of your work was this idea that we want the quick fix. Even those of us who practice yoga and do meditation, we don't like pain, right? Especially maybe people who are so attracted to a yoga and meditation practice because it's such a big coping mechanism for us to maybe deal with our anxiety. And what you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, is that we really need to get comfortable going in to that pain and exploring it. Like, for example, maybe seeing a symptom as like almost like a divine message for us. Is that kind of what you're getting at? I want you to tell us more.
That's exactly right. And listen, I'm an extremely pragmatic person, extremely impatient. These are things that I'm working on a daily basis in my own spiritual practice. So I get it. It is only natural to need to feel better immediately, yesterday. And that is how and why, the pharmaceutical industry has become one of the most powerful on the planet, is because they offer this, illusion really is what it is of the quick fix. That of course breaks down the moment you look at the literature or even the anecdotal outcomes. We know that it's not that, but we've bought into a story that we are being offered a way out and how, right? So, cause it's important to us to know like why something is happening and how it's happening. So the real challenge in approaching illness through this lens is not so much, that you have to rob yourself of the carrot at the end of the, stick. It's just understanding that it involves an upfront commitment. And the commitment is very simple because it's a commitment to never letting go of the thread that says every single thing you're experiencing is meaningful. There's no random shitty luck, there's no random badness that just happens to you. Because if that were the case, why would you not want to just throw in the towel or take the med or whatever? Because there's no point. But the moment we can find meaning in it, then the suffering eases, right? And the meaning can be found as simply as saying, there's something in this for me, right? Like there is a carrot at the end of that stick. There is like a cookie for you. There is something in this for me. What is it going to be, right? So that's where the curiosity comes from. Like when you feel like you want to crawl out of your skin, when you haven't slept in 24 days, when you have this like excruciating stomach pain, whatever it might be, there is something in it for you, and you don't have to figure it out. So that's where, sort of this idea of yin yang or masculine feminine polarities comes in, because we're so entrained to fix it and figure it out and master the situation and beat it into submission. But I think many of us are learning that the real shift happens when we just be. We just sit in it and let it hurt. We just let it be that way. And part of that could even be explained on a nervous system level, right? Because our healing response is a rest and digest. It's called our parasympathetic nervous system, right? So most of us know that through yogic exposure and training. And that is where all of the magic happens. But that doesn't even come online if you are in fight or flight. It doesn't come online if you are in sort of the fix it, do it, reactive mode. So that's sort of the way to sort of play with your mind and get your mind to cooperate, is to sort of tell yourself, listen, the moment that I say, okay, okay, this is what's happening. I'm just going to let it be for a while so I can see if there's something I can, read, intuit, some hint I can get about what this is trying to tell me. And then actually the moment that you commit to that, actually things start to shift and you don't have to do anything, right? So that's sort of like this funny, it's almost like a counterintuitive element to this process.
This podcast was brought to you by SivanaSpirit.com. In ancient Indian mythology, and even today, chakras are considered to be the most important energy centers in the body. It's been said that when all 7 energy points are aligned, deep spiritual development occurs. When the chakras come into balance, they bring harmony, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally. In fact, sometimes when we feel off, it's really just these energy points that need to be worked on. Celebrate the 7 chakras with a beautiful must-have chakra tank. Printed down the spine with sophisticated metallic ink, the chakras are represented by unique hand-drawn symbols. You can add a pop to your style with elegance, all while reminding yourself of the deeper spiritual truth of our world. Use the exclusive discount code PODCAST30 for 30% off your first order today. Do you want a $25 gift card from SivanaSpirit.com completely for free? It's super easy. All you have to do is fill out a quick survey with 7 short questions, and then you'll be emailed your gift card to use whenever you're ready. This survey will help us better understand the most important thing in the world, you. Go to SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey today and claim your reward. Again, that's SivanaSpirit.com/podcast survey. It's so funny because I don't think I've ever pulled together the parallels of our fix it, need a solution now sort of big pharma culture that we live in and this idea of yang energy, because we live in this very yang society. And it makes so much sense the way you're putting it. However, I do want to ask you, because I'm sure maybe some listeners at home are thinking okay, so I have a runny nose, or, my stomach really hurts, or maybe I'm just feeling very, very depressed. I'm supposed to just not do anything? I know that you talk a lot about diet and easy things we can experiment and sort of step into that role of the leader of our own healing and begin to tinker and play with. So can you walk us through, you have something that's not feeling good. What are the next steps then, instead of reaching for the pill or reaching for the quick fix?
Great question. I love that, because there's a big part of the conversation that is foundational to these principles, which are, we kind of dove in the deep end because most of the time I need to warm people up with the more sort of elemental components, which is actually the yang part. So there's no sort of magical territory in a yin, universe. It's both. It's always going to be in the polarities, right? So what I have sort of come upon as someone who is very, very masculine by nature and has been for the better part of my adult life, I thrive in the matrix, you know what I mean? Schooling and, doctoring and details and blood work. And I love all that stuff. I love quantification. It's why I was a big, prescriber, and I was very, bought in to the conventional model before I, took my left turn. So I'm very comfortable in that space, as many of us are. Although I would argue that many people who struggle with depression are not, because they are by nature these sort of empaths, these creatives, these bohemian folks who are jamming their circular selves into the square peg of our society. So I'm different than a lot of my patients in an important way. And one of those ways is that I like, protocol and structure, and I like commitment and high level discipline, right? Which is not native to many of the women that I work with. But what I've found is that when you have an infrastructure in your life of a commitment to self-care that trumps everything else, like it's a real no bullshit commitment that you make in full faith because it's the only thing you're going to commit to, outside of the curiosity about the meaning of your life experience, then what is that self-care supposed to look like? And that's pretty much like what I've tried to distill down in protocol that is available in a lot of my writing online for free and in my book and online program. And of course, it's exactly what I do in my practice. And the pillars are very basic. So it's, often preceded by a 1-month experience of like, what do you look like at your baseline of a high level of self-care? So a super clean diet, and we can get into the details if you want of what I mean by that. Some degree of detox. I'm a big advocate of coffee enemas, which I learned from my mentor, but it doesn't have to be that. It can be skin brushing or, rebounding for lymphatic support or infrared saunas. It's got to be something, because you can't live in a planet with 80,000 plus unscheduled toxic chemicals, decimating this earth and think that your body is going to be in harmony. Sweating is another powerful form of detox, for example. And then there's the meditative piece. So what used to be sort of some fringe luxury, in life, which was a sort of meditative practice, has now become a non-optional element of healthful living. And really, I don't think there's a person on the planet who can get away without a contemplative practice of some sort. Like, I am a Kundalini Yoga zealot, mostly because I never got anything out of mindfulness-based meditation. I always felt like I was doing a bad job. I never felt results. And as someone with a very, very, very active mind, for better or for worse, it was extremely challenging. I think of mindfulness meditation as being like an aspirational, sort of like next level for like the kids who are at the front of the class kind of a thing. And Kundalini is an amazing practice, obviously, for entry level, because it keeps you super occupied and you can have an experience in just a couple of minutes. And so I ask my patients to just start with 3 minutes, but every single day, no excuses, every single day. I'm a big sadhana, proponent, because like most people who have a pre-dawn practice, you feel the difference. I've actually even delved into the physiology of why that could be, that meditating before the sun rises versus later in the day could possibly have a different endocrine, for example, effect. And I think there's enough of an understanding, even ancestrally, around the fact that we used to wake up in our tribal days, like 40 minutes before sunrise at the coldest point of the night, not when the sun rose, but before. And that maybe we have this circadian entrainment that is going to lead us to more optimal, like stress hormone release, et cetera. And so these are the basic pillars. Many of the women that I work with are on medications, if not all of them, actually, when I begin work with them. And I ask them to leave their medications totally alone while they just have an experience of diet detox and meditation, but an experience that is no excuses. Because I actually like to reflect to people their highest capacity. And I don't want you to set the bar low for yourself, right? Like where you're like, 80-20 or baby steps. Forget it. Everyone can do this. It's 100% doable, and it's a choice. And so once you have made that choice, then you have this experience of what's possible through your own means, right? So there's no supplements, there's no special machines, there's no special doctors necessary. You do it on your own. And after that, you sort of work with the elements of it that you feel are non-negotiable, and the diet sort of maybe eases up to some extent, but not, you don't get sloppy again. Actually, none of my patients go back to eating a standard American diet ever. I've never had that happen one time. So on that bedrock, then when you have an experience of symptoms of any kind, like pneumonia, let's say, or some kind of diarrheal illness, you have a greater reserve and a greater capacity and frankly, a greater trust in your body to begin to know where you need to look for support in ways that are going to work with your body. So whether that's an acupuncturist or an herbalist or a naturopath, whether it's just deepening your self-care and your practice, whether it's being patient. But a lot of it comes with understanding that there's no mistakes and emergencies. It's taking a lot of the fear out of it. I have one of our fellow Kundalini teachers saw a shaman, right? So she has this appointment with the shaman. It's a tremendous experience. 2 days later, she was like bedbound with a fever. And I spoke to her, and she was literally like, this is the coolest thing ever. She found it so meaningful, that her body was undergoing like the echo effects of that spiritual experience, right? So that's how simple it is to give meaning to something that otherwise would induce fear, in another setting.
And what do you say to your patients? Because I'm sure we have listeners who are thinking this in their head. Dr. Brogan, this sounds great, really cool, like hardcore, cold turkey, and taking a month and doing all this work, but I'm really busy, right? I have a high-powered job, I have kids. And I know you said you can start with the Kundalini meditations being only 3 minutes, but I'd love for you to really give us a little kick about why this is completely feasible for everyone.
Well, here's the thing. We all have a sense that if we just keep on keeping on and we subscribe to this notion that we're not quite there yet, we're almost there, but not quite there. We know that we're going to do that until we die, right? You and I know that. So this pause either will happen electively, like maybe you're listening to this conversation, you're like, you know what, I'm going to do that in September, or it will happen involuntarily, meaning that you will be brought to a place of such desperation that you will either choose to go the conventional route or you will choose, obviously to work with a program like this. It will be, at a point in your life where you're very close to touching, spaces of nihilistic spaces, right? Because the women that I work in my practice with have been, to hell and back, been absolutely to the end of the conventional paradigm. There's no more choices for them. Some of them, I had someone in my online program, a mother of a son with schizophrenia who was about to bring him to Switzerland to kill him, like euthanasia. This is the level of desperation that people can get to when they finally feel ready, okay? But you can electively engage it, but there's unlikely to be a point, it's very unlikely that you can get to the end, have a fulfilling, meaningful life, and never address these issues in a focused way. And part of it is because we are designed, I think, socioculturally and otherwise, to be initiated, right? And as I mentioned earlier, we no longer do that, right? We are not in any meaningful way escorted into the next chapter of our adult lives, right? Because college doesn't serve that purpose. And, if you want to argue that childbirth is an inborn mechanism for women to encounter this dissolution of the ego, this expansion of consciousness, and this adoption of a locus of power within them that otherwise would always feel externalized, well, guess what? A vanishing minority of women are having natural childbirth at this point. Men are not taken out into the wilderness for a vision quest. We're not having an experience of, in a safe way, encountering our fears and blowing through them. So because of that, we are, I think, being initiated through illness, and I've found that actually specifically psychiatric medications and tapering off them has come to serve as a form of initiation for millions of people today. What I witness in terms of the psychospiritual transformation that attends a psychiatric medication taper, it looks like, when I am a midwife, in my office, I don't have to do much of anything, but I have to hold the container very steady for, them to go through a dark night. And that's perhaps the greatest, service I offer is quite simply to just be one of those, elders, so to speak, standing by saying, it's going to be fine. You're doing great, because we don't have anyone anymore who can tolerate when things get hard. Like everyone freaks out and everyone's trying to fix it and what doctor you need to see and you better do. There's so few people, and the people that I do know are all in the Kundalini community, but there's so few people who can just sit in it. And that's really what we need in order to peel back the layers of ourselves that need to go, like the skins that need to be shed. So that being said, I am one of the busiest people I know, if not like the busiest person I know, which is a problem actually, and an addiction of sorts probably. I was forced to explore this protocol through my own health crisis. So I was in the latter category of people who were involuntarily brought to this space. What's interesting is that where it's like that saying, where your attention goes, your prana flows, right? Like, it's so true. When you make a choice, anything is possible. But when you're not making the choice, at least you have to acknowledge to yourself, not that I can't do it, but you're choosing not to do it. And then there might be a point at which you choose to do it. But that kind of like the semantics, I think are actually really critical. So if you say, I don't have 3 minutes to meditate, I can't be bothered with dealing with my diet, I barely have time to even eat lunch, let alone, procure organic food. And, the last thing I'm ever going to have time to do is some sort of like fancy detox regimen. All right, fine. But understand that you're choosing not to prioritize that. You're choosing not to like treat your body like a holy vessel. And you're choosing to just live in the matrix. And that's your choice. And there's nothing wrong with that because it may not be time for you. And we need to be ready to like live, right, the answers that we will receive through this process. And if you're not ready, then that's 100% okay. But there's a difference between not being ready and having a little bit of resistance that you need to push through.
There's nothing more essential to a gemstone collection than rose quartz, and SivanaSpirit.com has a beautiful selection you'll absolutely love. Use the code PODCAST30 at checkout for 30% off, and we promise you and your heart will be thankful. Yeah, and I think another big aha moment I had when looking at your work that I want to make sure listeners really get and grasp too is that if you're not ready and you're choosing to maybe stay on medication or maybe even just, pop that over-the-counter pain reliever that seems like not a big deal, that based on your research, like these medications, it's not like you just get the benefit of the medication. They all come with this slew of side effects, which could be why you're experiencing a lot of other potentially chronic conditions or discomfort or not performing at your peak. Am I understanding that right?
100%. And that's why my mission, on this planet can be reduced to one phrase, which is informed consent. I believe very passionately that we need all of the available information to properly attune to our best choice. And what's happening is we're only getting a keyhole look into conventional medicine's risks, benefits, and we're getting no look at powerful alternatives. I put my prescription pad down almost 10 years ago. I have never started a patient on medication since. And the outcomes that I witness literally bring tears to my eyes on a weekly basis. I have the most amazing job on the planet. And all I do is witness what it is to see people come into their bodies and step into their power. Part of that is for them to truly understand what is sacrificed when they take medication. And of course, my deep dive into the medical literature showed me, that the sacrifices come in the form of dependency and, risks that can be very acute, like violence risks and suicide risks, et cetera. And then also, what are they really offering you? So once you know what the literature says, like if we just want to engage on that third dimensional level, like what does the medical science say that maybe you aren't told about through your doctor because your doctor has only shown a certain, portion of the literature. Once you know all that, if it still feels like the best option for you, then you are doing the medicine that is right for you. But if you know a greater spectrum of information on pharmaceuticals, and then you say, you know what, I don't want to do this. I want to do something else, but I want to be sure that something else is a powerful option that's actually going to take me where I want to go, then obviously that's, what I'd like to provide is like that information in a nutshell, so that you can do you really, so you can do the medicine that makes sense to you. But I just feel like we're coming out of this age of obfuscation and everything is so cloudy and confusing. We don't know who to trust and we can't trust ourselves because we don't have a sense of our own intuition yet. But we just know that the options that are being presented just don't feel complete enough, right? Or we don't feel well. And maybe we're doing exactly what our doctor has told us to do. And so, what I'd like to make clear is that the room is bigger than the ceiling was leading you to believe. And part of that is just making sure that you have the information available. And some of that is just identifying someone that you trust who's done the background work. I mean, I've counted once actually, like more than 10,000 hours of reading on, the subjects that I speak on. I've gone down the rabbit holes of years of obsessive, research on this subject. So that I can distill it, and bring not the conventional talking points, because we know what those are. Those are already permeating our consciousness, but the elements of the conversation that have been selectively omitted.
We're going to let people know just momentarily where they can connect with you and find also your online program, because I know that's a great way for people to just get more of everything you're talking about here today. But last question, if you'll indulge me before we let you go, just because it's so rare that I have an MD and a Kundalini yoga teacher on the line. I think so many of us who practice Kundalini yoga, we're told that Yogi Bhajan really designed these kriyas. Listeners, if you don't know the kriyas, like the physical postures or yoga sequences in Kundalini yoga that are like mini recipes for our health, right? They're stimulating different glands and organs. And you kind of hinted at this when you talked about why getting up for sadhana might really be worth it at a neurological level and all that. But I just wanted to ask you, in your experience as a modern medical doctor who's really familiar with Kundalini as well, have you found this to be true? Is there an ancient science that's present here?
So again, it's worth mentioning that I come from firm grounds of skepticism, to all of this. So as much as I've felt experiences of the truth of what you just said, I, for whatever reason, still needed some, research, some science, some confirmation, some external, seemingly objective evaluation, which I, of course, recognize is silly, but it's almost like a security blanket I'm still dragging around with me, right? And honestly, one of the best books on the subject is a book called Meditation as Medicine, and it's by anesthesiologist, actually, named Dharma Singh Khalsa, and he convinced me. That book actually gave me what I needed as like a science-oriented person to help me understand that whatever has been channeled or divined through this practice is not unlike acupuncture, right? Like we can't how acupuncture ever came to be as a methodology. So many people argue that it was just channeled, like it was just like a big old download that came all at once. And, whether you believe in that or not, there certainly is a fair amount of science to support this idea that we can use our own bodies technologically to stimulate our own bodily processes, whether that's lymphatic flow or, different hormonal stimulation, pituitary, hypothalamic, et cetera, to activate self-healing. And as someone who has sort of gone to the reaches of conventional science and sort of looked down into the black hole abyss to see how much we don't know, I definitely have come to the conclusion that the body knows how to heal itself far better than we do at this point with our interventions. But the secret is, how do we activate that? And so I feel pretty strongly that Kundalini is one of those technologies. It's certainly not the only one, but I believe it to be a rapid technology. Dharma, in his own practice, he's like gotten people out of wheelchairs with Kundalini yoga. I mean, there's extraordinary anecdotes. And while conventional medicine is very dismissive of like the case study, right? Because we worship the placebo-controlled clinical trial, of which, by the way, there are several for Kundalini Kriyas. So while we are generally dismissive of the case study, the truth is, if it's happened once, it's more possible, that it could happen for other people. So that one happening, which is why, on my website, I have a whole wall of video testimonials of people having experiences that they were told by their doctors were not possible, experiences of healing, so that you in your soul can recognize that something is possible and perhaps it will become more possible for you. So I'm a big believer in sharing these radical stories of healing, and Kundalini has many of them to share. But I do think there's, a fair amount of compelling science to support what it is that we observe happen in this methodology.
I love everything you shared with us. I wish we had more time with you, but I know you have patients waiting. So why don't you tell our listeners the best way that they can connect with you online? I know your online program, Vital Mind Reset, is coming out and coming up. So I'm going to make sure to link that right below the episode. So those of you that want to study and go deeper, kind of do everything Kelly just talked about online with her in an online format. I'll make sure to put that link below. Kelly, anything else you think they should know about the program, or just the best places to find you on the interwebs?
Cool. Yeah. I mean, my website is just Kelly Brogan MD, and I have tried to make this available in all the ways of learning that might be relevant. So if you're sort of a self-starter, I have translated my book into blogs that are totally for free on the site. If you're a book type person, which I am, the protocol is in there in its entirety. The book is called A Mind of Your Own. And if you need more, that's what we've been working on for the better part of the past year. We've finished a year of beta launch of my online program, Vital Mind Reset, which essentially was born of my 2-year clinical waiting list in my practice, because it just felt like, this is crazy. This is not rocket science what I'm doing here. And this is totally something that people can do on their own. And so that's how this program was born. And we are going to be offering a lot of free bits of it coming up. So that'll all be on my website too.
Perfect. We'll put the links below for you listeners. Kelly, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's so wonderful and refreshing to have this kind of conversation with like minds. It's almost like starting from M in the alphabet instead of B. It's really wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity.
Listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, especially here to the very, very end. A lot of what Kelly and I talked about today is controversial, so I would love to hear your thoughts in our private Facebook group. SivanaEast.com/group will redirect you to that community where you can approve you as a member, and I would love to connect. Thank you so much for being here. I feel super inspired after this chat with Kelly, and I hope you do too. Make sure to take some time today to meditate, do yoga. So much love and sending healing energy from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Sivana Podcast. To find out more about Sivana, go to SivanaSpirit.com or follow Sivana on Facebook at Facebook.com/Sivana Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at SivanaEast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Sivana Podcast.